Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, President Biden issued the first veto of his presidency this week, blocking legislation that would have blocked the ability of retirement funds to consider so-called ESG in their investment decisions. So ESG, if you don't know, stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's become a real focus of the right as more investment funds and companies pledge to consider these factors in their decision-making. It's part of a new push for what's called stakeholder capitalism over the post-1970s focus on shareholder capitalism. So shareholder capitalism was actually a radical notion when it was introduced. It's the philosophy that public corporations should be run solely for the benefit of shareholder return. In theory, stakeholder capitalism is meant to return to older traditions of public corporations, which considered a wide range of interests from different stakeholders, not only investor return. So if done well, I think that could be an improvement from the short-term profit-driven status quo, but it completely fails in execution. These efforts have amounted to little more than corporate virtue signaling, identity posturing, and greenwashing. They're an attempt to convince legislators and the public they don't need more regulation, they don't need higher taxes, they don't really need for the government to govern at all. Corporate America in partnership with Wall Street, we got this, guys. We believe in good things too, so just let us handle the details of how to make the world a better place here. But for a lot of conservatives, ESG isn't just another capitalist virtue signal. It's an actual attempt to remake the world through diversity initiatives and green investments. Now, in order to steelman this worldview, I want to play a bit of presidential contender Vivek Ramaswamy's recent interview with Jordan Peterson. Now, Vivek really became a fixture in conservative media through his critique of ESG. He's been a true thought leader in this space, and he's done more than just critique. He also started Strive Fund. It's made large investments in large public companies with the intent of pushing them off of any ESG goals and back to the profit-maximizing shareholder value. Here's how Vivek describes the birth of ESG. Take a listen.
What this whole game is about is using private power, using capital markets to accomplish through the back door what government could not get done through the front door under the Constitution. So the essence of the ESG movement is what it does is it uses the money of everyday citizens, Americans, but Canadians too, Australians and Western Europeans. It uses the money of everyday citizens to invest in companies and to vote their shares in ways that advance one-sided progressive agendas, environmental and social agendas, that most of those people do not agree with, that most of those people did not know were actually being advanced with their own money, and which don't advance the financial best interests of most people whose money is actually used. So what does that mean? Think about yourself saving in a retirement account or a 401k account or a brokerage account. You think that the person who's managing that money is exclusively looking after your best financial interests. It turns out they're not. They're also looking after advancing these other environmental and social goals. Who are these institutions? They're asset management firms like BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard or Invesco or countless others that have signed a pledge to say that they're going to align all of their underlying companies with the goals of the Paris Climate Accords, with net zero standards by 2050, with modern diversity, equity, and inclusion standards. And those 3 or 4 firms alone manage about $20 trillion, maybe even a little bit more. That's more than the US GDP right now in the hands of 3 to 4 financial institutions.
So Vivek defines their ESG as, quote, using capital markets to accomplish through the back door what government could not get done through the front door under the Constitution. Goes on to talk, as you heard, about the power and money held by just a handful of institutions. And on this point, I actually completely agree. Because while corporations and Wall Street may pay lip service to a goal that I support, which is dealing with the climate crisis, I am under no illusion that these are actually my allies on this or any other issue. The answer to the problem of corporatocracy lies in checking corporate power through unions, through trust busting, regulation, taxation, getting money out of politics. But these are not actually Vivek's preferred solutions. Instead, he established an anti-ESG fund, which seeks to use the very same tactics that he objects to when deployed by ESG types to try to coerce corporations into behaving in the way he wants them to behave. So it's not so much that he opposes corporate power, just corporate power being used for things that he doesn't like. In addition, Vivek asserts that the public does not support the goals of ESG, hence the notion repeated by others that this is forcing changes on the American public that they do not want. So let's examine that. Now, on social justice, I think it really depends on what you mean, how you ask the question. Majorities of Americans of all races do say systemic racism is real. Even among white Americans, only 29% disagreed with that statement. But if you ask about some of the goofy, so woke it's racist stuff that's pushed by DEI consultants, I could easily imagine very different responses here. However, when it comes to environmental concerns, the polling's actually a lot more clear. Polls consistently show large majorities of Americans, including a majority of Republicans, support transitioning away from fossil fuels. Even voters in famously pro-coal West Virginia support making this transition and using federal dollars to do so. So in this particular survey, they found West Virginians are supporting green energy spending by the federal government by a 15-point margin. So it's not even particularly close. So when Vivek and others claim that capital is sneaking in an agenda they can't win through democratic means, they actually have the failure of democracy completely backwards. The public has seen their desires blocked by anti-democratic means from achieving the clean energy policies they would like to see enacted. Now, the reason Congress hasn't done more has nothing to do with public will and everything to do, again, with big money. There are a lot of people making a lot of money off of maintaining the current fossil fuel-based economy. Big Oil, Koch Network, and others have flooded the campaign coffers of key legislators to try to prevent the action that the public actually desires. But while Vivek uses the language of democracy to explain his opposition to ESG, there's no sign he's actually interested in making legislators more responsive to the people, at least not on issues where he disagrees with that majority sentiment. In fact, he's quite derisive about the activists and citizens who are concerned about the climate crisis and think it worthy of action. He dismisses them in a monolith in this interview and others as, quote, climatists who have foolishly adopted concern for the environment as a sort of pseudo-religion because their lives are otherwise devoid of meaning. Now listen, I don't doubt that people find deep satisfaction in doing work or activism that they find meaningful. There's nothing nefarious about that. But there's also a much simpler story here. A lot of people are just genuinely concerned by the mountain of evidence that the climate crisis is bringing more droughts, floods, hurricanes, and wildfires, and that the results will be quite bad if we don't deal with that. In fact, they are already quite bad, and that increasingly we actually have the tools to be able to tackle that crisis. So the truth is, while Vivek has a clever intellectual pitch that he makes here, what he's doing is not really anything new. He opposes action on climate by business, and he opposes action on climate by the government. All the rhetorical nods to corporate power and democracy can get in the way of seeing that he has the same position as every other climate denier out there. Opposing ESG is appealing because it has the aesthetics of being against the system, sticking it to corporate America. But in reality, his efforts, they're a giant gift to Big Oil, to the Koch Network, to quite a few, by the way, of those Davos elites that he rails against. Joe Biden just greenlit the giant Willow project for ConocoPhillips. Is he an anti-establishment renegade taking on the system? I hardly think so. There's another part of this interview, though, that I think is important on the social justice piece of ESG. Listen to Vivek's telling of the birth of the ESG movement and its alliance with what he and Peterson describe as the radical left. Take a listen.
The left actually had a point in this country. Occupy Wall Street was born. And what they said is, look, if you're going to play that crony capitalist game, then you know what? We're going to play our game. We're just going to take money from your wealthy corporate fat cat pockets and redistribute it to poor people to help poor people. Because that's what we on the far left want to do on the Occupy Wall Street movement. But right around that time, there was a fissure in the left-wing movement in this country where there was the birth of this new, let's call it the woke left. Barack Obama had just been elected the first black president of the United States. There was a lot of cultural currents in the US that said, well, wait a minute there. The real problem isn't quite economic injustice or poverty. It's really racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry. And by the way, climate change. This is post-Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. This actually presented the opportunity of a generation for Wall Street to say that, no, okay, guys, we'll make a deal with you. We will use our corporate power, use our money, really your money, to applaud diversity and inclusion, to put token minorities on corporate boards, to muse about this racially disparate impact of climate change from the mountaintops of Davos after flying there in a private jet. We'll do all of these things, but we don't do it for free. We expect the new left to look the other way when it comes to leaving our corporate power intact. And so they defanged Occupy Wall Street. Most people don't even remember what Occupy Wall Street is. It went by the wayside. And that's how the birth of this new, what I've sometimes called woke industrial or ESG industrial complex was born, where Wall Street said that, you know what, if you can't beat us, join us.
This is a nice story, but it's not remotely what happened. Even Jordan Peterson expresses some skepticism of this fairy tale. First of all, the Occupy movement, it didn't just go by the wayside. Key organizers from Occupy were involved in drafting and supporting Bernie Sanders for president. You might recall that Bernie carried a strong message about the 99% versus the millionaires and billionaires and would have been president had he not had the nomination stolen by the Democratic establishment led by Hillary Clinton. It was not Bernie and the Occupy offshoots that abandoned the bank and class-focused critique of power. It was Hillary Clinton and the neoliberals who relentlessly clubbed Bernie and his supporters as quote-unquote class reductionists. Remember when she harangued the left because breaking up the big banks wouldn't end sexism and racism? So there is, in fact, an unholy alliance here, but it's the polar opposite of what Vivek postulates. Neoliberals, led by Hillary Clinton, who had long been in bed with Wall Street and corporate America, this was nothing new, invented the ungodly, counterproductive politics of personal identity and virtue signaling. And that is the context in which ESG emerges, as a way for corporations to signal to gullible, confused, mostly affluent liberals that they are actually the good guys here, and as a way for Hillary Clinton to try to claim progressive cred even as her record was regressive and terrible. The actual left was smeared relentlessly with this toxic mode of politics, I can promise you that. And many did ultimately submit to it. Even Bernie made sure to include a lot more language of the identity politics left in his 2024 run, even though, of course, his core policy commitments did remain the same. The irony is Vivek admits that funds like BlackRock are hypocritical in their stated environmentalism. So he, on the one hand, will acknowledge they aren't even really doing the thing that they claim to be doing. But on the other hand, he posits that ESG represents some fundamental restructuring of the economy that must be stopped at all costs. Again, not by checking corporate power, but by backing the corporations which support his preferred ideology and forcing other ESG-backing corporations to abandon their fake goals. Now, this confusion could stem from his misunderstanding of the history here. If this was truly a left-aligned movement, maybe it would have had some teeth. Since it's just warmed over neoliberalism, it definitely doesn't. It's just standard cutthroat capitalism with a new fake label on top of it. So if you want the fossil fuel status quo to continue, don't worry, fellas. Studies have consistently found ESG portfolios, they actually have worse environmental records than non-ESG companies. That's how fake this whole thing is. There are new numbers out, though, that show that 43,000 Somalians died due to a drought caused by famine last year, a majority of them children under 5. Now look, the climate skeptics worry that the transition from fossil fuels to renewables could impose a terrible cost on the world in terms of food prices and energy prices, especially among the global south. Those are real fears, and they are, by the way, something that climate activists concern themselves with a great deal. But the cost of doing nothing, they're already here, and they're being borne overwhelmingly by the poorest nations and the poorest people. So if you think just staying the course or doubling down on fossil fuels is the way to go, look, honestly, I think you're wrong, but it is a democracy. Go out and make your case. But don't try to hide behind tortured arguments about corporate power and the woke left. They're really just a smokescreen for opposition to all climate action, wherever it comes from. Honestly, I sort of miss the old days when people would just be upfront in their climate denialism, because at least that was honest. And that to me is the irony. I also have an ESG critique, which is that it is all, Sagar, fake, bullshit. Nonsense, bullshit, greenwashing. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now. And Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us. And if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.